1939. Deep in the mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico, an anthropologist named Gene Johnson is living with the Mazatec people, watching something he can't explain. Healers chew the leaves of a plant. Within seconds, they drop into a trance, and when they come back, they describe things they shouldn't know, where a lost object is hiding, what's actually making someone sick, things that haven't happened yet. Johnson writes it all down. He knows he's looking at something huge. There's just one problem. Nobody will tell him what the plant actually is. He documents everything except the one detail that matters most. Then World War II happens, and Johnson dies a few years later, notes still incomplete. The plant he found sits there, unidentified, unclassified, a ghost in the scientific record, for more than 20 years. Not because nobody was looking, because nobody could catch it. That plant is Salvia divinorum, and figuring out how long it took the modern world to even admit it existed is one of the strangest footnotes in the history of psychoactive plants. Here's the problem scientists ran into. To officially name a new species, you generally need a flowering specimen. Leaves alone don't cut it. And in the wild, Salvia divinorum almost never flowers. On top of that, the Mazatec who grew it kept its location secret, passed down through specific bloodlines of healers. This wasn't hidden the way you'd hide something shameful. It was guarded the way you guard something sacred. So for 2 decades, Western science had a name for the ritual, second-hand descriptions of the experience, and zero actual proof the plant existed. Everyone who'd been to those mountains had seen it, and it still wasn't real, not scientifically, because nobody outside the Mazatec community could produce the one thing required to prove it. It wasn't until 1962 that 2 men went looking for it on purpose. Albert Hofmann, the chemist who had first synthesized LSD back in 1938, and Gordon Wasson, a banker turned ethnomycologist who'd spent years chasing sacred plants and fungi across the globe. They traveled into the Sierra Mazateca specifically hunting for this thing, and Mazatec healers, for reasons only they truly know, decided to trust them. They handed over a flower. That single sample went to a botanist named Carl Epling, who finally did what should have been possible 23 years earlier. He gave it a name, Salvia divinorum, sage of the diviners. Here's the part that still bothers taxonomists today. Even with a name, nobody has ever figured out where this plant actually came from. Salvia is one of the biggest plant genera on Earth, somewhere around 900 species. Salvia divinorum is one of only a small handful with no known wild ancestor, no confirmed origin population, no clear evolutionary starting point anyone can point to. It just appears in the historical record, fully formed, already in Mazatec cultivation, and that's exactly where the trail goes cold. Some researchers even suspect nearly every Salvia divinorum plant alive today might be cloned from 1 or 2 original cuttings carried out of those mountains decades ago. The plant on a windowsill abroad and the plant used in a Mazatec ceremony could be, genetically, almost the same individual. So what exactly were they protecting for all those centuries? Not a party drug, not even close. Salvia divinorum was a tool, a diagnostic instrument closer to a doctor's office than a celebration. Healers used it to locate missing objects, diagnose illness, or ask questions they had no other way of answering. Ceremonies happened at night, in near total darkness, in silence, usually guided by someone experienced enough to interpret whatever the person experiencing it couldn't put into words on their own. This was closer to booking an appointment with a specialist, one who happens to operate through an altered state of consciousness instead of a diagnosis chart. And the experience itself doesn't look anything like what you're probably picturing. Forget slow-building colors, trailing visuals, effects that stretch out for hours the way something like psilocybin does. This hits almost instantly, and it's usually over within 10 to 15 minutes. People don't describe gentle distortion. They describe disappearing, merging with objects in the room, reliving childhood memories as if they're physically back there again, losing any sense of having a body or even being a distinct self entirely. Short, intense. By most first-hand accounts, not something people would call fun, something closer to overwhelming. The compound behind all of this is called salvinorin A, and it wasn't even isolated and identified until 1982, 20 years after the plant finally got its name. And when scientists looked closely, they found something that set it apart from nearly everything else in its category. Most classic psychedelics, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, work primarily on serotonin receptors in the brain. That's the common thread tying nearly all of them together. Salvinorin A doesn't touch that system at all. Instead, it works on the kappa opioid receptor, a completely different pathway, making it the first plant-based psychoactive compound of its kind ever identified by science. So this wasn't just a 23-year mystery about giving a plant a name. Once researchers finally got inside its chemistry, it turned out to be operating on wiring nobody had documented before. A plant that took decades just to be acknowledged was quietly rewriting what scientists thought they understood about how psychoactive compounds function in the brain. For centuries, this was one small community's closely guarded practice, passed down through specific healers, protected not out of shame, but because it was treated as something serious, something with weight. Then, within a few decades of that 1962 expedition, cuttings from what was likely a tiny handful of original plants spread around the entire world, propagated in gardens and greenhouses on nearly every continent. And here's the twist. In its native habitat, Salvia divinorum almost never flowers, exactly why it took 23 years just to classify. But the moment cuttings reached gardens outside Mexico, it turned out to be remarkably easy to grow. Snip a stem, root it in a glass of water, and it takes almost anywhere warm and humid. A plant that science could barely even find turned out to be one of the easiest psychoactive plants on Earth to grow. The instant someone actually got their hands on it. That contradiction is a big part of why it spread so fast once it escaped its original context, and it's part of why, even now, regulators in different countries still can't agree on how to legally classify it. Some ban it outright, some leave it unregulated, and most haven't decided at all. So the next time someone tells you there's a plant science barely understands, remember Salvia divinorum, documented in 1939, not formally named until 1962, origin still unknown in 2026, a species hiding in plain sight in the mountains of Oaxaca for who knows how long, waiting for the one thing it needed to finally become real to the rest of the world.